Okay, today we're going to talk about training a little bit. Training, this topic will remind us, like we need reminding, but IO psychology is an application of the field of psychology. So the basic principles of psychology, as established in, let's say, the field of learning, are now applied to the field of IO psychology to enhance training. Training is just a funky word for learning, right? I mean, that's really all it comes down to. So, in this topic, we're going to break it apart into three chunks. Training, what is it, why they need it. We're going to talk about the learning context or those principles of learning that enhance, the training. And then how training is delivered, and then evaluate whether or not that training, in fact, doesn't do its job. Okay? So, training, there you go, any kind of teaching. But over 90% of Fortune 500 companies have some kind of a training program. So clearly the big wigs think it's important, right? U.S. organizations spend 126 billion with a B annually, whereas the top 125 companies spend 30.6 million each. So clearly there's a lot of money being placed into this and a lot of emphasis on it. So why would you need it? I mean, a valid selection system, right? You did your selection battery, and you had your big R squared, and blah 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 blah. Yeah, and that's important. But in some ways, what happens is that these perhaps these selection batteries predict who will be successful after they've been trained. That's really what it doesn't. These selection batteries don't necessarily predict who will be successful, but who will be successful once they have been trained. And so clearly this is an important idea because the current university system, especially the liberal arts environment, as we know our university is composed of fundamentally with the general education type classes. And so what happens is at the university level, students are not being trained and not being pushed into a specific career. A university is not a career training center, right? We're not training you for a specific, we're in fact trying to implement you specific, broader skills such as critical thinking skills, for example, which will allow you to be successful on any job. And so many of the selection procedures, which we talked about earlier, like a general cognitive and things of this nature, ability to think on your feet and things like that, were general skills that are related to success at many jobs. So now you want to learn the specific job. In fact, this reminds me of an interesting story. I remember after I finished my PhD, I was going to go for a postdoc down at the University of Texas Health Science Center. It was a fascinating thing. It was all biology. It was all brain scans. It was quite complex, you know. And I asked this guy because he was really excited. He really wanted me back. And I said, I really don't have any training in anything like that. And he says, that's no big deal. You have a broad-based training in science. Therefore, because you have that powerful background, I can train you on these specific tasks in a couple of days. Okay? It'll only take a week or something to train you on this, as long as you walked in with the fundamental skills underneath. And so a valid selection device is really to get those underlying skills, not the specific things for the job. Okay? Clearly, training is not just something you do with new employees, but it's something you need to take your current employees and perhaps do as well. Okay, so you continually develop them. Computer skills, new programs come up, lots of things. I continually have to do training at my job, and it's always like, oh, the federal government has a new requirement for this, and so all employees must blah 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 blah. So I'm continually involved in this kind of thing as well. Okay, we call it faculty development or something, but it's just training. Okay. We find that the use of training tends to lead to increased organizational commitment and productivity, and it tends to lead to less absenteeism and less turnover. So clearly, this does play a larger role in the organization. Formal procedures that a company utilizes to facilitate learning, blah, 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 blah. However, Training must come from the KSAs identified in the job analysis. So your job analysis identifies KSAs, and clearly when you identify in your company, you're looking to see whether or not you need training, you're going to look at what are the KSAs required for the job, what do my employees have, bada bing. Okay? So we'll talk about it a little bit more formally than that, but fundamentally that's what it comes down to. What are the KSAs in the job analysis? What do my employees have? What's the deficiency between them? So here I'm going to go back to more a formal rather than my bada bing kind of method and say, okay, do we need training? I mean, training costs a lot of money, all right? Not only does it cost money for the training program, but generally speaking, most employees are being paid while being trained, and you have to pay the person that does the training. So it is relatively expensive, and so you want to make sure that you're getting something for your dollar. And so there's three different ways that we can analyze this organizationally, by task, by person, or by demographics. Huh? The organizational analysis will look, instead of at the employee's job analysis specifically, instead at the organization's long-term and short-term goals. They say, this is what we want, this is where we are. How can we implement training to minimize the distance between what we want and where we are? Okay? Pretty straightforward. A task analysis looks at a specific job. Okay, subject matter experts gather job information. They look at how is a job performed, how should it be performed. This type of task analysis is very similar to coaching, for example. In coaching, what happens is a coach's job is to look at their, sports coach. A sports coach will look at a player's current execution, and in other words, a baseball coach, okay? What their job is the baseball coach's job is to know what a perfect batting stance is supposed to look like. Look at me. A perfect batting stance is supposed to look like, and then the coach's job is to say, well, currently the way that you perform the task is deficient in this way, and the way that you can change it is. So it's to look at the way the task is performed and try to optimize it. Person analysis. What you might end up doing, I mean, obviously from the simplest perspective, you could simply go into your factory and you could measure number of products produced per hour and pick your bottom 10 people that are having the lowest performance and figure, that's where I'm going to get the most benefit from my training, is those people that are the most efficient or something. Or customers might give you feedback about which cashiers might need training in people skills. I like that. Okay. And of course, employees may self-nominate if they feel that they can benefit from this. And then finally, a demographic analysis can be done, where what you can do is you can break up your organization by demographics, the simplest being perhaps older employees. And you might look at those older employees and say, well, maybe they're going to need additional training in technology because they might not have some of the fundamental skills that, not even related to necessarily a specific program, but technology skills in general. The older employees just might not have them. Because the younger employees might, you might just say, oh, I want you to, take a screenshot. And the younger employees are like, oh, right? And the older employees may need training in something that should be just a basic skill, right? So clearly you might look at your company and break it up by demographics and say, is there something about this demographic, this group of people that might benefit from additional training? Okay? And so we've got a summarization of them all right here. Now, we'll come back next topic and we'll talk more specifically about the principles of learning and how the principles of learning can in fact help us to enhance or maximize the effectiveness of training.